The concept of faith doesn't always enjoy a great reputation among UUs. We are known to be a restless and often skeptical bunch, questioning most all received wisdom. We tend to want to see good data regarding truth claims, and we filter those claims through the sieve of our tradition's fourth principle of affirming and promoting a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Not so much for us the old maxim of take it on faith. I can pretty much trace my own religious awakening, which decades later led to my becoming a UU. It happened because my Catholic father had married my Lutheran mother, despite Catholic precepts at the time that forthrightly declared only Catholics could enter heaven. When I was in third or fourth grade listening to the priest lecture on this matter in a religious education class, I thought of my kindly, long-suffering mom at home, cooking and cleaning and keeping 6 kids in line while my father worked all the overtime he could find. They had come to America from post-war Europe with 3 of those kids in tow. And in a classic immigrant story, they both worked themselves to the bone while producing 3 more mouths to feed once they got here. So when the priest stood before me to proclaim in so many words that my father and us baptized kids would probably go to heaven if we were good, but my mom definitely wouldn't no matter how good she was, I had a distinct reaction. Even at my tender age, I recognized it as such self-evident poppycock that I was not so much offended or outraged as I was dismissive. In the contest between believing the priest and the reality of my mom and her great big heart, belief did not stand a chance. Notably, anything that has required similar belief on my part has not fared too well since. But what is belief really? In the example I use about the priest and my mom, is there a difference between believing what he said and having faith in what he said? Distinctions between faith and belief in religious literature are subtle at best. In fact, they are often used as synonyms for each other. But if there were no difference, there really wouldn't be a need for 2 words, would there? And it turns out that the good old dictionary provides us with a perfectly workable distinction. It defines faith as a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. The definition of belief is different. It's an acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists. And then there is hope, a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. We see here that faith is what underlies and makes hope possible. We can look to infants on this point and the profound pre-rational faith they develop that a person will respond to their hunger, thirst, and need for comfort. Faith is a foundation from which hope can grow and belief can be confirmed or not. Can we have hope at all without some kind of faith that our hopes might be realized? Without faith that things can get better, we're like Eeyore, who was both the funniest and most tragic character in Winnie the Pooh. Good guy, good heart, but faithless and therefore hopeless. He wouldn't dare hope because all he can see is its end in disappointment. It's pessimism refined to a razor sharp edge. It's true that there's a little bit of Eeyore in most every human being. That's largely why he's such a popular character. We recognize in him the part of ourselves that is sometimes tempted to shrink back from a challenge, fearing we may not be up to it. But civilization would collapse in upon itself if Pooh were ever to become its dominant voice. Still, something else besides pessimism often gets in the way of faith, of confidence that our hopes may come to fruition. Paradoxically, hope's worst enemy is sometimes a rock-solid belief that certain particulars will occur, and even more problematically, that certain particulars have occurred in the past. Christianity's sacred text tells of a sky god who created the universe in 6 days and placed Earth at the center of it. Later, he sent his only son down from heaven, imbuing him with magical powers to walk on water, silence storms, and emerge from his tomb after being dead for 3 days. Employing strictly our rational faculties, we know these stories as either rich with myth and symbol, or else merely absurd. Yet many millions of Christians around the world believe in them literally, as unerring historical fact, as an imperative that their tradition requires in order for them to remain in good standing. Belief in these supernatural phenomena is a matter of faith. It is faith in the tradition and its stories that allows for belief in the otherwise unbelievable. This brings to mind the cleverly named but short-lived 60s rock band, Blind Faith, because this kind of faith is blind indeed. It says, I can't see it nor prove it, and though it may be absurd, I believe it anyway. Why? Because I have faith. It's a kind of perfect and closed cosmic circle, which can, at least to a degree, provide believers with comfort in an uncertain world. The problem is that when those beliefs turn out to be verifiably false, the entire edifice of faith can crumble right along with the shattered belief. That is largely what occurred as a scientific revolution upended much traditional religious belief, which has been in retreat ever since. Genesis proved to be no match for the likes of Galileo and Einstein, at least in the domain of physical reality. This was brought into sharp relief when the august body known as Time magazine featured a black cover in April 1966. No photograph for the first time ever, with only 3 words in large, bold red type asking, is God dead? That was a question bedeviling Reverend Clarence Wilmot. He's the central character in John Updike's 1996 novel, In the Beauty of the Lilies. Updike was a practicing Christian who often dealt with the implications of a steadily secularizing society in the late 20th century. His Reverend Wilmot is a Presbyterian pastor in 1910 who loses his faith in seemingly sudden and catastrophic fashion. His voice literally takes leave of him in the pulpit one Sunday, very shortly after he has concluded that his entire belief system, all his received notions of God, can't possibly be true. In a subsequent meeting, his liberal-minded superior tells him not to belabor the specific faith and belief issues. Doubt and even unbelief need not be debilitating, he suggests. Just mouth the words, tend the ill, wear the collar, and get yourself back in the pulpit. He implores Clarence, doctrine is a living expression of a living God and is properly the subject of ongoing and at times radical reconsideration. Now that sounds a bit like a UU, doesn't he? But the bereft Pastor Wilmot is having none of it. He feels incapable of leading his flock by what he now considers deception. How can he face his congregation on Easter Sunday with the triumphant, Christ is risen, when, as he tells his wife, I not only no longer believe with an ideal fervor, I consciously disbelieve. At one time, Clarence had hung his entire identity on belief in his tradition's central stories. Now he cannot, and the implications for his life are appalling. Clarence soon leaves the ministry, loses the income his large family depends on, and is reduced to selling encyclopedias door to door. He tries to escape from the bleak facts of life, his life gutted by God's withdrawal, to the solace of the movies, which become a kind of substitute religion for him. But it doesn't last long, and neither does the sales career. Clarence endures a few downward spiraling years until, in Updike's words, he slipped away one night, just died without a sound. He does so as a broken and disheveled man in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Truly one of the more abject figures in all of American literature. So what happened to Clarence? I think like many people who abandon religion or else don't even consider it, he suffered from an essential confusion that collapses faith and belief into each other. He failed to see faith as the undergirding orientation toward life that can sustain and save us when all seems lost, including our previously held beliefs. Faith is about the unparticular and undogmatic, love, generosity, community, a heart and mind open to the new day and new ways. Belief is about the concrete and dogmatic, which we can and should change when evidence points elsewhere. Belief often asks us to believe the unbelievable to prove how strong our faith is by swallowing whole what are essentially literary tales meant to stimulate our imagination and help us identify with characters and situations that reflect eternal verities. Faith asks us to orient our lives toward freedom and love, hope and communion, not constrict them with dogmas that separate us into camps of the elect and the damned, believers and heretics. It might be worth noting here that parents have been naming their daughters Faith and Hope for millennia now, but when is the last time you reached your hand out to greet a little girl named Belief? And now for an ironic twist. The decline of religion as science ascended over many centuries has been accompanied, probably inevitably, by a decline in most all institutional authority. In recent years, this has come to include not only government, law enforcement, academia, and the media, but science itself, right here in the NASA-loving, moonwalking US of A. Witness the COVID-19 pandemic with tens of millions of Americans distrusting scientists and the vaccines they have produced with such incredible speed. What is going on here? For many reasons time will not allow us to go into now, this collapse of faith in institutions has left a vacuum that propagandists and fantasists with nefarious agendas are only too happy to fill. With no abiding faith that our institutions can be trusted to have our best interests at heart, suspicion hijacks the driver's seat, with hopelessness riding shotgun. This is a conundrum with no easy answers, as we are currently deep in a hole of conspiracy mongering and magical thinking. But four words do come to mind: faith, hope, community, compassion. We will get nowhere without them. We are right to cast a wary eye on much of the denialism and delusion that has engulfed our country like a second lethal virus. Skepticism toward easy answers is in our UU DNA, after all. What we can't allow is for that skepticism to become nihilism. We do not have to believe in any given future in order to maintain our faith in that future and in our current actions that can affect it. And it is perhaps more important still to maintain the faith that we and all those who come after us will have the power to adapt and frame that future. After all, according to the doomsayers, the world has been going to hell in a handbasket for a very long time now, hasn't it? And yet, here we are. We can't readily change anti-maskers and anti-vaccinators, anti-anything really, unless we keep our own houses in order, our own faith intact, our own beliefs clear but always subject to review. If there is an alternative to living in faith and hope, I sure don't know what it is. It strikes me as a moral imperative. Keeping an essential faith in the goodness of people, all people, including ourselves, despite our inherent and unavoidable imperfection, is really the only means to achieve whatever flourishing we are capable of in our lifetimes, and for spreading that flourishing to others, if only by relentless example. In this pandemic year, if we have learned anything anew, or at least learned it more deeply and piercingly, it is how much we need each other, how much we desire each other's company. And to a great degree, just as all the holy books have always told us, how responsible we are for each other. As our haunting and beautiful offertory hymn today suggests, not one voice, but many voices. Not one note, but still one song.